quarter don't have health insurance or a high school diploma. So there's really a divide in income inequality and just standard of living divide within an hour's drive. And it's hard for me to understand how that's even possible. One of the things I've been running on is just, how is the oil and gas center of the country? How do we have, in just my district, in just these 5 counties, over 20,000 people living in poverty?
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't take into account the people who make $1 more than the federal poverty line, which is still poverty. It's a mixture. There's lots of farming, there's lots of oil field, but for all of our seeming wealth, there's still a lot of people who are very much struggling to get by.
So let's talk a little bit about your age and the age difference between you and your opponent. How old are you?
24.
You're 24. So you are not just a millennial, but a fairly young millennial. And how long has your opponent been in office?
He was first elected 50 years ago this year, so 49 years.
49 years.
He was first on the ballot with Richard Nixon. He's been in office a decade longer than my parents have been alive. My parents are about your age. And interestingly enough, he was first elected when he was 25, when Texas was a one-party state, our party. And so there's some similarities there. He was told over and over again, you can't possibly win, and then he did it and went on to be a major reason why Texas is the one-party Republican state that it is today.
Are you hearing from people that your campaign isn't as serious because you're so young? Are you hearing from people that you can't possibly win?
Certainly hearing from people that I can't possibly win. It doesn't have as much to do with my age. There's certainly people that, will make comments on social media, why should we trust someone who hasn't lived their life yet to be our representative and that sort of thing. But for the most part, it's you can't win because Democrats don't win out here. And as we're seeing all over the country, that's not necessarily the case anymore.
Yeah, certainly. Have you had any debates with your opponent or any public forums or anything like that?
No, actually, right after I filed, actually the day I filed, as I was driving back to Midland, I was interviewed by the paper, and then a few days later, they interviewed Tom Kotick. And in a nutshell, what he said in the interview is that he's unbothered by the fact that he has an opponent of any kind. And after 50 years, I can understand why he might think that. But no, I've had zero interaction with his campaign, and frankly, I'm not even sure he has a campaign. We haven't gotten any ads or any mailers or any signs or anything with Tom Kotick's name on them. And part of that's because we had a primary and he didn't have a primary opponent.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't have a campaign website. He doesn't have social media, and he rarely makes public statements. We don't hear from Tom Kotick, whether it be from a campaign standpoint or as a representative. And I've been trying to go back and look at public statements from him on policy points and bills and that sort of thing, and there's just not any. I guess at this point he doesn't think he has to do anything.
I want to tease out one of the things that you said, so I think there's sort of maybe more than one thing going on here. When you said, he doesn't have much of a campaign, but you also mentioned that he doesn't have a website and a social media presence. I guess what I'm getting at here is that there's both the sort of unresponsive incumbent who doesn't worry about the constituents, doesn't worry about getting their opinion on things or reporting back to them. But there also seems to be a little bit of a generational or multi-generational gap in this regard about the way we think about information and the flow of information. It seems to me that one of the things that is true about millennials overall is that as a generation, they're very used to getting a lot of information and a lot of information readily available and quickly, so I'm a good deal older than you are, but it's still the case for me that, if there's a piece of information that I can't Google, I'm just flummoxed by that. It's like, how can that possibly be true?
It's frustrating. If it's not on the internet, it basically, it seems like the information doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's it's not as big a deal for me. My grandmother retired after 20 years of working at the Midland newspaper, so I very much still look forward to reading the paper, and if for no other reason than the people that are writing the articles are old family friends. But yeah, and I'm certainly not opposed to in any way making phone calls and sending emails to get the information I need. But yes, it is frustrating when there's no immediately available information of really any kind. I mean, you go to Google and type in Tom Craddock and news and nothing pops up, basically.
Yeah, so it seems to me that it would be unfathomable for a millennial candidate or even, a Gen X candidate to not sort of immediately think, okay, I got to get a Twitter feed going. I need a Facebook page. And it's the same, certainly when we made the podcast, before we had a single episode, we had Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and, we were ready to go with those things. But that does seem
Absolutely.
to be something of a gap. It certainly there are older politicians, our president being one of them, who do use social media quite a bit. But in many ways, I think a lot of politicians of older generations think of it as, oh, yeah, that's something else I need to make sure my staff takes care of, and not this is a way to really connect with constituents.
Right. I think that's exactly right. I mean, speaking to that point from my end, because I didn't have a primary opponent, I essentially spent December to early March building a social media presence. I went from 900 Twitter followers to over 6,000 in just these few months, and it basically was my full-time job because I knew how important it was to be able to get my message out there through social media. Having said that, I'm also very much in the process of getting a website set up and getting mailers designed and that sort of thing, and fundraising to send mailers out and letters. I still very much, I mean, the best ways to reach people are still knocking on doors and making phone calls, and to a lesser extent sending things out in physical mail. So that's definitely part of it too. But yes, social media, in my mind, it's not a question of if you need it, it's how well are you using it. Because I mean, especially for the younger generation, people my age aren't, say, publicly available voter data like the Voter Access Network and VAN. Their address still might be their parents' address.
Mm-hmm.
And their phone number is still listed as their parents' home phone number. So even if I sent something to that address, it may not be where they live, even though that's where they registered to vote when they were in high school or whenever. It's definitely a number one way to reach people your age and under. Having said that, that's not the majority of the voting population. It should be. It has the potential to be, but it's not,
Yeah.
because people my age, for various reasons, don't vote.
The other thing besides the social media aspect is I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the issues, both the issues that are important to you, but the issues you see as being important to millennials and millennial voters.
Other than classic democratic socialist issues, women's rights, civil rights, LGBT plus rights, etc., we need to have a focus on education, a focus on jobs. Even in places like Midland, if you're not looking to get one of those $40 an hour jobs in the oil field, they leave. I left for a long time because everybody, young people always say that they don't like their hometown, or there's nothing here for me, or there's nothing to do, et cetera, and that is actually true about Midland. We got excited when they built a third movie theater.
Hey, that's more than my hometown has.
Hey, and we still have a drive-in, which is cool. We want the same things as everybody else. We want to get an education and not die passing along our student loan debt to our kids. We want to be able to buy a house, but we can't afford one. We want a job that is something that we at least partially enjoy and can pay our bills, without having to go out and break our backs. We want health care. We want voting rights. I don't like the phrase millennial issues very much, in the same way that I don't like, Hispanic issues, et cetera, just because for the most part, we all have the same issues. We all have the same needs. And the biggest things out here are getting getting an economy set up that works for everybody. Making this a place where we want to stay. We're just not there. Again, it's interesting to me that we're on the list for highest per capita income levels, but when that's averaged out, Midland's 1% makes so much money that there are so many people that don't make any money, but it seems like everybody does. I mean, I'll give you an example from my own life. I was working as a waiter in December, and I got the flu because everybody got the flu in December. And I don't have health insurance, and I didn't have money to go to the doctor. And so I was out for a week. And thankfully, they let me keep my job even after being out for a week. To me, the thought of them letting me keep my job because I was sick it just bothers me. And in fact, I was out for about a week, and I went back to work for about a week, but ended up losing my voice in the middle of a shift because basically I went back to work before I should have. Through the course of that week, I my voice kept getting worse and worse, and I started getting sick again. And I finally said, one, I lost my voice in the middle of a shift, and it was a morning shift, and I was supposed to come back that night, and I couldn't. I couldn't talk. I couldn't communicate this to my managers. I had to get about an inch away from his face to talk to him at all. And I was like, I can't come back to work until I can talk again, because this could do permanent damage to my voice. For all I know, if I kept working for another few days, even without the voice, I would have gotten majorly sick again. And they fired me because I couldn't work. And that's just it. It's just emblematic of where we're at. We don't make enough money to pay for health insurance. And when we get sick, we lose our jobs because we can't afford to go to a doctor. I couldn't afford to even go and get a doctor's note, let alone get treatment. And so I was basically sick for like a month with no job. Basically, in a nutshell, the way we do business is just wrong. And I don't mean that just in the business part. I mean just the way we do everything. As a quote little guy, it certainly seems that nobody particularly cares about the little guy. So that's not a new story, but it certainly hits home for me right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, healthcare, labor laws, voting rights, education. Those are the issues. And most of that ties into infrastructure of various kinds.
All right. Is there anything else you want to make sure our listeners know about you or Midland, Texas?
I'm going to repeat something I'm sure you've heard over and over again about Texas. We're, I believe, 49th in the country for voter turnout. It's not that we're a red state, it's that we're a non-voting state. There are something like 90,000 registered voters in Midland, and only, I think, 10% turned out for the primary for either party. If we can just convince people that voting is something they need to be paying attention to, and that, if enough people cast their vote, yes, your vote does matter. It certainly seems like your vote doesn't matter if all of our elections are decided in the Republican primary. And that's certainly been the case for a long time. Thankfully, we do have in West Texas a larger slate of Democratic candidates at every level than we've had in my lifetime. So there's something happening here. Democrat or Republican, there are issues that we can all get behind. Again, there's no reason reason at all for Dawson County to be 21% in poverty. There's no reason for 37,000 people in my district to not have a high school diploma. These are issues that we haven't paid attention to. Someone said on social media, commented on one of my social media posts on Facebook, I guess a week or more ago now, and I listed the poverty, healthcare, and high school graduation stats for the district. And someone said, how is any of this the purview of the state representative? And that just clicked to me. And for the last 50 years, it hasn't been purview of the state representative. And if I win, we're going to change that, because people are living on the streets. People are getting sick and dying for stuff that could easily have been cured if they could just afford it to go to the hospital. People could have access to higher paying jobs if our schools were good enough and they didn't drop out. To me, these are all of these things are society's problems, and it's time to fix them. Long past time.
All right. Well, I certainly agree with you, and I'm excited that you're running, and don't believe the naysayers.
Yes, yes. I'm generally an optimist. I'm aware that I probably won't win, but I know that this